Work emergencies don't usually require cologne. That was the thought that wouldn't stop circling my mind as I stood in the middle of our bedroom, still wearing my new ivory silk robe, watching my husband pack a duffel bag instead of a suitcase. We had been married for exactly 3 days. 3. The scent of garden roses from our wedding bouquet still clung faintly to the dresser. My wedding dress hung on the closet door, protected in plastic like something sacred. And yet Marcus was moving quickly, folding dark jeans and a navy polo into a bag far too small for the week-long conference he claimed had just come up. "It's just a quick thing," he said, not looking at me. His voice was calm, too calm. "They need me to smooth over a client situation." "In the middle of our honeymoon?" I asked softly. "Our flight to Bali was in less than 2 hours." He zipped the bag. "I'll catch up with you in a few days. You go ahead." "Non-refundable tickets, right?" I watched his reflection in the mirror. He adjusted his watch. Sprayed cologne at his neck, the expensive one. He only wore to impress, and in that moment something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, quiet fracture. I nodded slowly. "Of course. Work comes first." He finally met my eyes then, and there was something that, or irritation, I couldn't quite name it. He kissed my forehead instead of my lips. 30 minutes later, I stood alone at the departures gate, holding both of our boarding passes, and that's when I knew something was very wrong. Before that morning, I would have described my life as steady, predictable, warm in the way late afternoons feel when the sun rests gently against your living room curtains. Marcus and I met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's dinner party. He was charming in that easy, practiced way, attentive without being intense. He remembered small details, asked thoughtful questions. Brought me soup once when I mentioned I had a cold. I had been 32 then, tired of dating men who treated commitment like a prison sentence. Marcus felt stable. He worked in corporate communications for a mid-sized tech firm. Long hours sometimes, but he talked about building something meaningful. He liked structure. Rutina. Sunday grocery runs. Friday movie nights. He proposed on a quiet beach during a weekend trip to Carmel. No flash mob, no drone photographer. Just him kneeling awkwardly in the sand, hands trembling slightly. "I don't want a dramatic life," he had said. "I just want one with you." And I believed him. Our wedding was small but elegant. Close friends, family. My mother cried through the entire ceremony. His father clapped him on the back like he'd just sealed a business deal. Jade was there too. At the time, she was just Jade from work, a coworker who'd helped Marcus coordinate some PR for the wedding venue. She wore a sleek green dress and hugged me a little too tightly when she congratulated us. "You're a lucky woman," she had said, smiling. I remember thinking she seemed polished, ambitious, maybe a bit competitive in the way some women in corporate spaces learn to be. But I didn't think much of it. Why would I? The first night of our marriage, Marcus had held me close and whispered, "I've never been more certain about anything." I replayed that sentence 100 times while sitting at the airport. Certain about anything. My phone buzzed. "Marcus, boarding now. I'll call you when I land." Boarding where? The lie wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was thin and fragile, like tissue paper stretched too tight. I did something I'm not proud of. I opened our shared location app. We had installed it months earlier for convenience, grocery pickups, safety when driving late. His location wasn't at the office. It wasn't even near it. It was at Whispering Pines Resort, a quiet, wooded retreat 2 hours north of the city. The kind of place couples go to disconnect. My heart didn't shatter. It didn't explode. It simply dropped. I stared at the tiny blinking dot on my screen while boarding announcements echoed around me. Families laughed. A toddler cried somewhere behind me. The world continued in its ordinary rhythm. I zoomed in. Room numbers weren't visible, of course, but I knew enough. Work emergencies don't happen at luxury resorts, and they certainly don't require cologne. I could have turned around then. I could have called him, screamed, demanded an explanation, but something steadier and quieter took hold instead. I walked onto that plane, alone, The flight to Bali felt suspended outside of time. Clouds drifted past the window like soft white secrets. I barely touched the meal tray. My mind replayed every small moment from the past few months. Late nights at the office. The way he'd angled his phone away sometimes. The subtle distance in his kisses, present but not rooted. Had I ignored it, or had I trusted him too completely? When the plane landed, warm tropical air wrapped around me like a second skin. The scent of salt and frangipani flowers lingered in the breeze. The driver holding the Mr. and Mrs. Web sign smiled brightly when I approached. "Just me," I said gently. He didn't ask questions. The Serenity Bay Resort was everything Wed dreamed about: private villas, infinity pools that melted into the ocean horizon, soft lantern light flickering along stone pathways. The receptionist congratulated me on my marriage as she handed me 2 welcome drinks. I took both. That first night I sat alone on the balcony, listening to waves fold against the shore. The sky was a deep velvet blue. Somewhere nearby, soft acoustic music drifted through the air. I could feel 2 versions of myself. One wanted to cry, to rage, to call him and demand the truth. The other felt strangely calm. If he was at Whispering Pines with Jade, then he had already made his choice. What I did next would be mine. I lifted my glass toward the ocean. "To clarity," I whispered. My phone buzzed again. "Marcus, just landed. Meetings all day tomorrow. Miss you already." I stared at the message. Then I typed back, "Hope the conference rooms have a nice view." He didn't respond. And for the first time since our wedding, I allowed myself to breathe, not as someone's wife, but as myself. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. The sheets were cool against my skin. The distant sound of waves folded gently into the shore like steady breathing. Pale gold light slipped through the gauzy curtains of the villa. And then I remembered. One day abandoned. I reached for my phone, half expecting an apology, some frantic confession, something to make sense of the hollow place in my chest. There was nothing new, just his last message from the night before: "Meetings all day tomorrow." I sat up slowly and walked to the balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead of me, calm and indifferent. A group of early risers practiced yoga on the beach below. I could hear their instructor's soft voice drifting upward, speaking about grounding, about presence. Grounding, presence. The irony almost made me laugh. I made myself If I was going to be alone in paradise, I would not spend it pacing and refreshing a location app. I showered, put on a simple white sundress, id packed for a romantic dinner, braided my hair loosely. The mirror showed a woman who looked tired. Yes, but not broken. At breakfast, couples leaned close across small cafe tables, hands brushing over fresh fruit and coffee cups. A few glanced at me curiously. The woman seated alone at a table meant for 2. I smiled politely when the server placed 2 menus in front of me out of habit. "Just one," I said gently. After eating, I wandered through the resort gardens, letting the scent of jasmine and sea salt calm my racing thoughts. That's when I saw the sign near the main pavilion. Serenity Bay Renewal Contest. Share your story of transformation. Winner receives $10,000 and a feature in our global travel spotlight. There was a small table set up beside it with entry forms and a decorative wooden box. I stood there longer than necessary. Transformation. It felt like a word meant for someone braver than me. But then I thought about Marcus at Whispering Pines. About Jade's tight smile at my wedding. About the way he'd kissed my forehead instead of my lips. And something inside me hardened, not cruelly, not bitterly, just resolutely. I picked up a form. That afternoon, I didn't explore temples or book a couple's massage I'd originally reserved. Chum and Denberminer hardened. Explu temples have in. Denberminer said. Instead, I sat at the small writing desk inside the villa. The ocean breeze lifted the curtains occasionally. My phone lay face down beside me. The prompt was simple. Tell us how this journey marks a new beginning in your life. At first, my pen hovered uncertainly. What was my new beginning? I was still in the middle of the ending. But slowly the words came. I wrote about trust, about how easy it is to anchor your identity to someone else's promises, I wrote about standing at an airport gate holding 2 boarding passes and realizing one of them was never meant to be used. I didn't mention names. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth as I understood it, that sometimes the greatest journey begins not with romance but with revelation. I wrote about choosing to board the plane anyway, choosing not to let someone else's deception cancel my own experience. By the time I finished, my hand ached. I read it over once, resisting the urge to soften it or dramatize it. It felt raw, honest. I folded the pages carefully and slipped them into the wooden box. As they disappeared inside, I felt something unexpected. Relief, Marcus called that evening. I almost didn't answer. Hey, he said brightly, too brightly. How's Bali? Beautiful, I replied, my voice surprised, me steady, almost serene. The sunsets are incredible. Wish I was there, he said. There was background noise, laughter, glasses clinking faintly, not the echo of a conference hall. I leaned back against the balcony railing. How's the resort? I asked casually. Silence. What resort? Whispering pines, I said softly. The pause stretched longer this time. I could almost hear his mind scrambling. What are you talking about? I saw your location, Marcus. Then a sharp exhale. It's not what you think. That sentence. It's almost funny how predictable betrayal can be. I haven't said what I think, I replied calmly. It's a client retreat, he said quickly. Jade is here because she handles part of the account. That's it. I closed my eyes briefly. Did you plan this before the wedding? That's not fair. That wasn't my question. His voice changed then, less defensive, more irritated. Paige, I don't need to justify every work decision to you. Work decision. The word work had never sounded so hollow. I hope your meetings are productive, I said quietly. Paige, I'm about to head to dinner, I interrupted. We can talk when I get back. I ended the call before he could respond. My hands trembled slightly afterward, not from sadness but from clarity. He hadn't denied being with her. He had simply reframed it, and I realized something crucial in that moment. If he was capable of lying so smoothly 3 days into our marriage, then the betrayal wasn't sudden, it was cultivated. The next few days unfolded differently than I'd imagined a honeymoon would. I took a cooking class with a local chef and learned how to grind fresh spices into curry paste. I went snorkeling alone, letting schools of silver fish dart around me like fleeting thoughts. I woke early to watch fishermen cast their nets into the pink horizon, and every evening I wrote, not just for the contest but for myself. I began documenting everything, the emotions, the realizations. The small victories of choosing joy anyway. I didn't check Marcus's location again. I didn't need to. On the 4th night, there was a knock at my villa door. A woman in a crisp resort uniform stood there, smiling warmly. MS Webb? She asked. Yes, I'm part of the Serenity Bay guest relations team. We'd like to invite you to tomorrow evening's reception. For what? Her smile widened slightly. You've been selected as a finalist in our renewal contest. For the first time since boarding that plane, my heart fluttered, not with pain, but with possibility. The reception was held under a canopy of lanterns that swayed gently in the evening breeze. I almost didn't go. For a moment I stood in front of the mirror inside my villa, staring at the navy dress. Eden. Originally packed for a romantic dinner with my husband. It was simple, off the shoulders, soft fabric that moved when I walked. I traced my collarbone lightly and thought about the way Marcus used to kiss that exact spot. Then I exhaled. I wasn't dressing for him. I was dressing for the woman who had boarded a plane alone. When I arrived at the pavilion, soft instrumental music floated through the air. A small group of guests gathered near the bar, sipping champagne. Some looked nervous, others excited. I recognized a few faces from around the resort, a widower traveling after his wife's passing, a young woman celebrating sobriety, a retired couple renewing vows after 40 years. And then there was me, the almost bride. Dat tumbered up tex. A tall woman with warm eyes approached the center microphone. She introduced herself as Elena, the resort's director of guest experiences. We created the renewal contest, she said, to honor guests who arrive here at a turning point. Not because life is perfect, but because they choose to grow through imperfection. Hair words felt like they were aimed directly at my chest. One by one, finalists were invited to share brief excerpts from their stories. When my name was called Paige Webb, my stomach tightened. I stepped forward. The microphone felt heavier than it should have. The ocean roared softly in the distance. Lantern light flickered across attentive faces. I unfolded a small portion of what I'd written. I arrived here on what was meant to be my honeymoon, I began, my voice steady but quiet. But sometimes the most important journey isn't the one you plan with someone else. It's the one you take alone, when you realize you deserve honesty, even if it costs you comfort. There was silence. Not awkward, but listening. I stood at an airport holding 2 boarding passes, I continued, and I understood something simple. I could either go home and wait for answers, or I could board the plane and begin asking new questions about myself. My hands stopped trembling halfway through. I don't know what my marriage will look like when I return, I finished honestly. But I know this. I will not shrink myself to fit inside someone else's lie. The applause was soft at first, then warmer. When I stepped back into the crowd, my heart wasn't racing from fear. It was beating from strength. The winner was announced an hour later. Paige Webb. For a second, I thought I had misheard, but Elena was smiling directly at me. I walked forward in a daze as applause surrounded me. Someone placed a small crystal plaque in my hands. Another handed me an envelope. $10,000, Elena said gently into the microphone, and a feature story in our international travel spotlight. I blinked. The amount didn't even register at first. It was the second part that echoed. Feature story. Exposure. A quiet awareness stirred inside me. Exposure works both ways. The feature interview was scheduled for the next morning. A young journalist named Marissa met me at a small cafe overlooking the water. She carried a sleek camera and an even sleeker curiosity. Your story resonated deeply with our team, she said as she set up her recorder. It's rare to see someone frame heartbreak as empowerment without bitterness. I smiled faintly. Bitterness takes energy I don't have. She laughed softly. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About love, about intuition, about the moment I chose to get on the plane. She asked carefully worded questions about my husband. I answered truthfully, but cautiously. I think, I said slowly, stirring my coffee, that sometimes people reveal who they are not when things go wrong, but when they're given an easy opportunity to do wrong. She paused at that. Are you planning to reconcile? I'm planning to have clarity, I replied. That afternoon I received 3 missed calls from Marcus. I hadn't heard from him in almost 2 days. When I finally called back, he answered immediately. Where have you been? He demanded. His voice sounded strained. I've been here, I said simply. Why are people from work asking me about Bali? I leaned back against the balcony railing again, watching the sun lower itself into the sea. What do you mean? There's a photographer who tagged the resort in a preview post, he snapped. It mentions a newlywed overcoming betrayal. Jade sighed. There it was, not concern for me, concern for optics. I didn't mention names, I said calmly. You made me look like a villain. I closed my eyes. Marcus, I said softly, I didn't make you anything. The silence that followed was different this time. Less defensive. More afraid. Are you going to tell people? He asked quietly. The question hung between us like a fragile glass. I haven't decided, I answered honestly. Paige, we can fix this. Can we? I thought about whispering pines. About cologne and late-night laughter in the background. About the way Jade's hand had lingered at my waist during a wedding photo. I'm not interested in fixing something that was broken before I saw the cracks, I said gently. He exhaled sharply. You're overreacting. No, I replied. I'm reacting. I ended the call. My hands were steady this time. 2 days later, the full feature went live on Serenity Bay's website. The headline read, From Honeymoon to Healing, One Woman's Journey to Self-Discovery. It was beautifully written, honest, reflective, and still nameless, but the comment section began to fill quickly. Guests shared the link. Travel blogs picked it up. The story traveled further than I expected. By the time my flight home approached, the article had been shared thousands of times. Marcus texted once more the night before I left. "We need to talk. Please don't do anything rash." Rash. I looked around my villa one last time, at the desk where I had written, at the ocean that had listened without judgment. Then I typed back, "I'm done protecting your secret." I didn't add anything else, because for the first time in my life, silence felt powerful. The plane ride home felt different from the one that had taken me to Bali. I wasn't suspended in confusion anymore. I was suspended in decision. Somewhere over the Pacific, while most passengers slept with their heads tilted awkwardly against seatbacks, I opened my laptop and began to write again. Not for a contest. And not for a resort, but for myself. I created a simple blog page, nothing flashy. Just my name, Paige Donovan, instead of Paige Webb. I stared at that choice for a long time before clicking publish. Donovan, my maiden name. It felt like reclaiming something quietly stolen. And I titled the first post, "What Happens When You Board the Plane Anyway?" And this time I didn't withhold names. I wrote about Marcus, about Whispering Pines Resort, about Jade Collier, coworker, wedding guest, mistress. I didn't insult her. I didn't speculate. I simply stated what I knew. Dates, screenshots of location logs, the phone call where he admitted she was there. Truth, when told plainly, is powerful enough. Before I could overthink it, I hit publish. Then I closed the laptop and watched the sky outside shift from indigo to pale blue as we neared home. When I stepped through our front door that afternoon, the house smelled faintly of stale air and something unfamiliar, like expensive perfume that wasn't mine. Marcus stood in the kitchen. He looked tired, not remorseful, just tired. "You're back," he said quietly. "Yes." For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have. He cleared his throat. "We need to control the narrative." Control. Narrative. Even now, he spoke like a communications strategist. "I'm not a press release, Marcus," I said softly. His jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I told the truth. "You named Jade. You named the resort. My company monitors public mentions. This is going to blow up. I set my suitcase down by the stairs. It already has." His eyes flickered with something close to panic. "You could have handled this privately, like you handled our honeymoon privately." That landed. He looked away first. For a long time we stood in that kitchen, the same one where we'd once danced barefoot while cooking pasta, the same one where he'd kissed flour off my nose and told me he couldn't wait to build a life together. "I didn't plan for it to go this far," he muttered. "Did you plan for it at all?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he sank into one of the dining chairs and rubbed his temples. "It started as work," he said finally. "Long hours, shared stress." Jade understands the industry in a way you don't. There it was. Not an apology. An explanation wrapped in justification. "Did she understand our vows?" I asked quietly. He flinched. "We were under pressure," he insisted. "The wedding was expensive. Expectations were high. I felt trapped." Trapped? The word felt like a slap. "You proposed," I reminded him. "I know. You wrote your own vows. I know. You told me you didn't want a dramatic life. Just one with me." He looked up at that, and for a fleeting second, I saw the man I had loved. Then it was gone. "I made a mistake," he said. "No," I replied gently. "You made a series of choices." The consequences began unfolding faster than either of us anticipated. By the next morning, my blog post had been shared across multiple platforms. A few travel influencers referenced it. Someone connected the dots between my article and Marcus's company, a firm that prided itself on ethical brand representation. Irony is loud when it wants to be. His phone rang constantly that day. He stepped outside to take most calls, pacing the driveway while neighbors pretended not to notice. I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, reading comments from strangers who said things like, "Thank you for telling the truth. You're braver than you know. I booked a solo trip because of this." Each message felt like a small brick rebuilding something inside me. Around noon, Marcus walked back inside. "They're launching an internal review," he said flatly. I didn't respond. They're saying the public exposure damages the company's image, that it contradicts our core values. I met his eyes. And does it? He looked away. 2 days later, he was placed on unpaid leave pending investigation. Jade blocked him on every platform. I know this because he told me, not angrily, but almost desperately. She says she needs to protect her reputation, he said one evening, staring blankly at the television. Reputation. The word tasted different now. You both seemed comfortable risking mine, I replied softly. Instead, he moved into the guest bedroom that night without me asking. The house felt quieter than it ever had. Not peaceful. Just honest. My parents came over the following weekend. My mother held my hands tightly at the kitchen table. Her eyes filled with concern, but also something else. Pride. You handled this with dignity, she whispered. My father nodded once, firm and steady. Actions have consequences. Marcus stayed upstairs while they visited. For the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt aligned. Aligned with truth, with myself. And that alignment was stronger than... A week later, the official email arrived. Marcus's employment had been terminated. The company cited conduct inconsistent with organizational values. He read it twice at the kitchen counter before setting his phone down carefully. That's it, he murmured. I watched him quietly. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph. The house we had purchased together sat between us like a question waiting to be answered. I've spoken to a lawyer, I said gently. He looked up slowly. You're serious? Yes. He nodded once, almost as if he had expected it all along. I'll move back in with my parents for now, he said quietly. There was no dramatic argument, no shouting. Just the quiet dismantling of something that had never truly been whole. As he packed a suitcase, this time larger than the one he'd taken to Whispering Pines, I stood in the doorway. I did love you, I said honestly. He paused. I know, he replied. But love without integrity isn't safe. He didn't respond to that. And as the front door closed behind him, I stood alone in the house that was suddenly unmistakably mine. The first night alone in the house felt strangely familiar. Not lonely, just unshared. I walked through each room slowly, turning off lights Marcus had once insisted we leave on for ambiance. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt clean. His absence was not an echo. It was space. I slept in the center of the bed that night, not curled to one side. Not reaching for warmth that wasn't there. And in the morning, sunlight poured across the hardwood floors like a quiet blessing. The divorce process began with paperwork and polite emails. No screaming matches, no courtroom theatrics, just signatures. Marcus didn't contest the house, perhaps out of guilt. Perhaps because he knew public sympathy was not on his side. By then, my blog had grown beyond anything I imagined. What started as a single post had turned into daily reflections about solo travel, self, trust, rebuilding identity after betrayal. I posted photos from Bali, videos from the cooking class. I wrote honestly about the nights I still cried unexpectedly, when I folded laundry alone or found his old concert tickets in a drawer. Healing isn't linear, and I didn't pretend it was. But I also wrote about power, the power of boarding the plane anyway. Within 3 months, brands began reaching out. Small at first, luggage companies, travel journals, wellness retreats. Then larger ones. My following grew steadily. Women, and some men, messaged me from different countries, saying my story gave them courage to leave toxic relationships or to take trips they'd postponed for years. One message in particular: I was going to cancel my solo trip because my fiancé cheated. After reading your story, I went anyway. It changed my life. I read that message twice. Then I cried. Not from sadness, from impact. Marcus, on the other hand, struggled quietly. Mutual acquaintances updated me without my asking. He moved into his childhood bedroom, interviewed for several communications roles, but the public nature of his dismissal followed him. In industries built on reputation, credibility is currency, and his had been publicly questioned. Marcus, on the other hand, struggled quietly. Mutual acquaintances updated me without my asking. Interviewed for several communications roles, but the public nature of his dismissal followed him. In industries built on reputation, credibility is currency, and his had been publicly questioned. 6 months after I returned from Bali, I was invited to speak at a small women's leadership conference. The irony wasn't lost on me. Me, who once believed stability meant silence. I stood backstage in a simple cream blazer, holding note cards I barely needed. The room buzzed softly with conversation beyond the curtain. When my name was announced, I walked out slowly. The applause felt warm, not loud, not overwhelming, just supportive. I looked out at faces of women of all ages, some confident, some uncertain, and I told them a story, not about revenge, not about exposure, but about choice. I used to think loyalty meant endurance, I said into the microphone. That love required shrinking yourself to preserve peace. A few heads nodded. But loyalty without honesty is not love, I continued. It's performance. The room grew still. I boarded a plane alone because I realized something simple. Someone else's betrayal does not cancel my future. I paused. It redirects it. After the talk, women approached me with tears in their eyes. They hugged me like I had handed them something tangible, but the truth was, I hadn't handed them anything. I had simply stopped hiding. The divorce was finalized quietly on a Tuesday afternoon. I signed the last document at my kitchen table, the same one where Marcus had once defended his client retreat. When I placed the pen down, I expected a wave of emotion. Instead, I felt steady, not victorious, not bitter, aligned. I walked outside and sat on the porch steps, letting the late autumn air cool my cheeks. Across the street, a neighbor raked leaves into careful piles. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. And yet, everything felt different, because it was mine again. That evening, I received a final message from Marcus. I never meant for any of this to happen. I hope you find what you're looking for. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back. I already have. I didn't block him. I didn't need to. His chapter had ended naturally. A month later, I booked another trip. This time to Greece. Not because I was running. Not because I was proving anything, but because travel had become less about escape and more about expansion. Before leaving, I stood in my bedroom, now redecorated in softer tones, lighter fabrics. The window donated quietly. In its place hung a framed photograph of the Bali sunrise I had taken alone. The sky blushed pink against endless water. A reminder, sometimes the most powerful revenge is not destruction. It is elevation. Marcus lost his job, his reputation, the illusion of control. Pain had been the doorway, but I chose to walk through it. And on the other side, I found myself waiting. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evenings, long after the world has quieted down, and I think about that morning in our bedroom. The duffel bag, the cologne, the forehead kiss. If I had confronted him right then, if I had screamed or begged or demanded answers, would anything have changed? Maybe, but I don't think so. Because betrayal doesn't begin the day you discover it. It begins the day someone decides their comfort matters more than your trust. And here's what I've learned. You cannot control who chooses to deceive you, but you can control whether you shrink in response. Boarding that plane alone was the smallest brave thing I've ever done. I didn't board it to prove a point. I boarded it because I refused to let someone else's dishonesty dictate my joy. Marcus's consequences weren't crafted by me. They were crafted by his own choices. I didn't ruin his career. I didn't destroy his reputation. I told the truth. And sometimes truth is louder than revenge. 6 months later, I live in a house that feels like home again. I run a travel blog that connects me with people across the world. I wake up without wondering who I need to be to keep someone else comfortable. That is freedom. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that breathes. So let me ask you something, gently and honestly. If you were standing at that airport gate, holding 2 boarding passes and realizing one of them would never be used, would you still board the plane? Would you choose yourself? If this story spoke to you, if you've ever turned heartbreak into power, share your thoughts. Tell me what you would have done. And if you're walking through your own version of a broken promise right now, I hope you remember this. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't watching someone fall. It's rising so steadily that they can't even reach you anymore.